Okay. In that case, I will start. First of all, thank you very, very much for inviting FLAP to speak to your group today. It's always exciting when we get out-of-province inquiries, just because, as we know, bird collisions happen absolutely everywhere. So today we're going to be speaking to you about what happens with bird window collisions and a bird's eye view on reflections of that. And are your windows a pane in the glass? I'm going to go with possibly yes. In fact, when we do in-person presentations, we do ask people this question at the start of a presentation, and we ask them to put their hand up if they've ever experienced either a window strike at their home or workplace. And people put their hand up, and then we ask them to look around. And anywhere from 90 to 95% of the people in the presentation will put their hand up, and you're not alone. Unfortunately, most people at some point will have experienced it, and the numbers are staggering. And I'm hoping to be able to give you a little bit of information as to what causes the problem, but more importantly, how to fix it. So you can save questions to the end, because I may answer some of your questions during the presentation. And I'll keep my fingers crossed that I keep my internet stability. So who is FLAP? We're a nonprofit organization that just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And it's heartbreaking to know that we are still doing this after 30 years, because it means that the problem still persists. Our goal is to safeguard migratory birds in the built environment through several initiatives that we've developed over the years. When we first started doing this, it was with rescue and rehabilitation. But since then, the data collection and the advocacy and education has all been a part of what we do. But our focus right now, aside from education, is guidelines, policy, and standards development. Because if we can get that in place, it will mean that hopefully the built environment will look a little bit differently for birds coming in the near future. Our programs include several ones that we've developed: Bird Safe for commercial buildings, the Global Bird Collision Mapper, Global Bird Rescue, and Birds in Your Hood. And Birds in Your Hood is actually a program aimed at school-aged children from senior kindergarten all the way up to grade 12, where we will go in, we will do a presentation to the students, and we cater it to the ages of the students, and then it's also followed by a walk in their neighborhood and e-bird list. They are contributing to community science. 30 years of doing this. We, as I mentioned, we are a nonprofit group. We are, well, actually, we work full-time. I retired last week, so we are now 3.5 people in staff, but we do have over 130 active volunteers, most of whom do participate in the building collision monitoring program. Our volunteers are out pre-dawn looking for birds that have collided with windows, and we actually monitor for about an hour pre-dawn right through to the end of the day. Not everyone does it for the full day, but we do have volunteers that will give 1 or 2 hours of their day, depending on their schedule. It could be pre-dawn, post-dawn, before school, at lunchtime, after school, after work, always on the lookout for birds that collide. We provide all training necessary, so the birds needing to be handled can be handled safely for both the bird and for the handler. And we always aim to try and rescue as many birds as possible, which is why we go out as often as we do. Our monitoring is about 6 months, 6 months of the year during both the spring and fall migrations. So we typically start around the end of March in the spring, go through to the end of May, early June, and begin again in the middle of August, because the autumn migration is always a little bit more relaxed, much slower, not as hurried as the spring migration, and can often go into mid-November. The beauty of our monitoring program, it means that our volunteers get about 6 months of the year off, which is a big bonus for many people, especially the pre-dawn people, so they don't have to get up at some ridiculous hour to go out and patrol. The unfortunate thing is, many of our volunteers don't get the chance to rescue many live birds. About 60% of the birds that we pick up either are killed on impact or die soon after, but every bird that we find is recorded, and I will explain a little bit about that later on in the presentation. What happens to all the birds that we find? On good days, our cards look like this. It means we have found that many live birds. Each bird is placed into its own unwaxed paper bag. We record the date, the species if known, and knowing your species is not a prerequisite to being a bird volunteer. We record the time the bird was picked up, we record the location and the facade, whether it's north, south, east, or west, because that can help spark a conversation to get a facade treated so that this doesn't continue. So on good days, our cards look like this. On bad days, our cards look like this. It means that there's been a lot of collisions. And the most collisions we've ever experienced at one group of buildings many years ago, thankfully we don't experience it that much anymore, was over 500 birds in a 6-hour period. And we actually had to stop counting because we could not keep up with the birds that were colliding. And the 3 buildings that were involved in this program actually treated 2 out of the 3 buildings and a connecting glass linkway several years ago, resulting in an almost 80% reduction in window collisions at those sites. So the monitoring is vitally important, and especially with the goal of getting to rescue as many live birds as possible. Many of the injuries are head trauma, because obviously the birds are flying in head first. Broken beaks, as you can see on this flicker. We have internal bleeding. We have eye damage, eye ulcers, which are not always actually visible to the naked eye. And we get broken wings. We get many, many types of injuries, not all noticeable. So typically, when a bird has collided with a window, unless the person who has that is an experienced rehabber and knows what they're looking for, we highly recommend that any bird goes to a licensed rehabber to test. Because if you are missing something like an eye ulcer, which prevents the bird from seeing clearly, that puts them at risk if you end up trying to release them and they fly off. And in fact, many of the calls that we get are from people who have found an injured bird and they kept it an hour or 2 and then the bird seemed okay, they let it go. Unfortunately, many of those birds will not survive after that initial impact without proper medical care. So it is important that the birds go to rehab if at all. Any birds that can be released, either after having collided just briefly, or if they've been taken to care and can be released after that, are taken to appropriate settings. Woodcocks, it took me about 45 minutes to go trudging through a specific area many years ago, looking to find what I consider the perfect location to release the woodcock. And it was mosquito infested. There were nettles, there was all sorts of things. And by the time I got there, I opened the box, let the bird go. He did a couple of circles over my head and went right back the way I had come. So I wasn't impressed with his lack of gratitude, but I was impressed with the fact that he was able to fly off and do his own thing. So we are careful where we release them. In the spring, we take them as far north of the city as we possibly can. In the autumn, we take them as far south and as far west as we can. Many of the birds will go around the lake, and of course we border Lake Ontario in Toronto. Many of them will cross the lake, so we try and get them away from areas that are as built up as many of these birds are found in. Of the birds that don't make it, the dead ones will go to the Royal Ontario Museum. From there, they're used in many, many different ways, including education. They trade with other museums. They're used as part of taxidermy, study skins, and also they are on loan to artists. And those fortunate, or I guess infamous birds that we get very rarely, will actually end up in the museum's collection. So we've averaged anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 birds a year that we've had to donate to the museum. So that amounts to a staggering number of birds in the 30 years that we've been doing this. I think most of you know all this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Most of the birds that we work with do use the major migratory flyways across North America. Ontario happens to sit under a mix of the two of them, which makes it one of the busiest passages on the planet, and which kind of gives us a double or triple whammy of all the birds coming through. So we don't just get the normal species, but we do get several species at risk. We do get the accidentals that come through depending on the time of year and the weather. And it makes it that much more challenging for us, because even though you know what to expect, and we average anywhere from 90 to 100 species each year, most of them are the same ones. Occasionally we do get odd ones. And we've actually picked up 176 different species in the 30 years that we've been doing this. The smallest is the ruby-throated hummingbird. The largest is the wild turkey. There was one that took out a plate glass just north of Toronto a couple of years ago. She died, unfortunately, and the building, unfortunately, chose not to follow our recommendations for bird-friendly markers, but one day we do hope that they will do that. So obviously, you know that they use visual cues when they're migrating, whether it's the setting sun, the Earth's geomagnetic field, the star patterns, or topographical landmarks. All of these are tools that the birds use when they're migrating. And when it comes to that, frequently found species, what you're seeing is years worth of birds that our volunteers found. These are the ones that, and every year we hold an annual bird layout to showcase the species, the variety, and just the sheer numbers of birds that our volunteers have found. And please remember, we only patrol in a very, very limited area. If we're finding 3,000 to 5,000 birds in that limited area, can you imagine what the numbers are elsewhere? So most commonly found species, Blackburnian warbler, ovenbird, golden crown kinglet, which just recently surpassed the white-throated sparrow, which is up until recently was the #1 bird that we had found the most of. So it's the top species. We had over 11,000. The golden crown kinglet unfortunately just took over that position. And unfortunately, when one kinglet hits, it's an entire flock that hits with it. And this is almost always in the autumn, when the majority of the birds are coming through. The young ones obviously fly at different times than the adults. And unfortunately, our busiest time is usually the week of Thanksgiving weekend. So, you know, we have our volunteers out there giving up their family time to go out and find these birds. Again, the smallest is the ruby-throated hummingbird. And we've always said that if bald eagles, hang on, let me get this right. If bald eagles hit windows at the same rate as hummingbirds hit windows, we would not be having this conversation, because it would have been fixed years ago. If a hummingbird hits your window, unless you happen to be there when it happens, or you see the body afterwards, you're not going to know about it. Species at risk. The most common ones we get are the Canada warbler, the eastern whippoorwill, the barn swallow is now going up in numbers, and the wood thrush. And unfortunately, the Canada warbler and the wood thrush are two of the ones that we do find the most of. I believe we're at over 24 species at risk now. So those numbers, unfortunately, will likely continue to go up given the state of the current political climate in our province. The government is not terribly conservation-minded. Let's look at numbers. 1 or 2 birds or 10 birds doesn't sound like much, but across North America every year, about 1 billion birds are estimated to die at window collisions. That's a staggering amount. And I know that recent studies have gone out that said we've lost staggering numbers of birds since the 70s. But this is not something that many of the populations can continue to sustain. It's not just window collisions, it's any number of other issues, whether it's pesticide poisoning, habitat loss, climate change. So many different things are happening, but window collisions are so easily fixed. This is something that can be done very quickly and very effectively. The glass is everywhere. It's on our homes, on our cottages, our condos, our transit shelters, our vehicles, noise barriers in the workplace. And the problem is birds cannot see glass. It's something that is a foreign substance to them. They just cannot anticipate it. And in fact, if you go to YouTube and you put in people running into glass shelters or glass windows, there's hundreds of videos that you can see on YouTube. The difference is most of those people aren't going to be badly damaged or die from that happening. Again, overbuilders in North America can be broken down by size. If you look at tall buildings, it's estimated an average of 1.7 million deaths annually for high rises. And this is where the misconception of tall buildings cause the most deaths. And even birders, people who are avid birders, seem to think that tall buildings and lights at night are one of the biggest problems, when in effect, they're actually not. Low to mid-rise buildings will cause the most deaths. And I'll explain that in the next slide. But if you look at the number of estimated deaths at single-story homes or two-story homes, 408 million. But look at the low to mid-rise, a good amount greater than that. So it's important to know what causes the collisions, what height the collisions occur, so that you know how to mitigate that threat. And when I mentioned this explains it, the high concentration of birds that do collide is based on the height of the tree canopy. Nighttime collisions, that's an exception because you've got lit buildings anywhere from 50, 60, 70 stories high. And in fact, that's where FLAT was first founded because of the fatal light that was being emitted from the tall buildings in the financial district in Toronto. Since then, however, we have found that the majority of birds will die during the day because of colliding with reflective or transparent windows during the day. And why is that? It's because most of the birds during the day are flying through the tree canopy, or they're looking to feed or rest or bathe during the day. So if you look at the hummingbirds at the lower levels where you've got all the beautiful plantings, you've got red begonias, you've got hummingbird feeders, you go up the tree canopy where the sparrows and thrushes go all the way to the top, 16 meters, whoops, hang on, let's go back. 16 meters plus, depending on if you're on the West Coast. The higher, the taller the tree canopy, obviously you've got birds in that canopy, but basically wherever you have greenery reflected in a window, or you've got transparent windows that reflect greenery from one side to the other, that's where you're going to get the most window collisions. This is, I'm completely aware that these are extremes in terms of architecture and design, but we are seeing more and more of these happening. And it's heartbreaking to see that because this is one person's quote, an architect, "We as a profession seem to be in love with glass, either that or our clients are. The myth that an all-glass facade brings nature in and transports one out into nature is strictly that, a myth. To us, the transparency and reflectivity may seem real, but to birds, it's illusory and deadly." And again, this is not something you would see commonly, but it is something that is a fast-growing trend. It's two issues: fatal light. And again, our name was founded on the lights at night premise, but over time we found that fatal light during the day can be just as bad, if not worse. So during the day, reflected sunlight from a building, in fact, is now an offence under the Species at Risk Act, and in Ontario under the Ontario Environmental Protection Act. During the night, light escaping can cause birds to be confused. And on nights when you've got inclement weather, you've got no moon, no stars, so the birds can't see to navigate. Any lights from tall buildings in urban areas can actually cause them to fly at lower altitudes, especially if you do have clouds or fog, and that's when they often collide with buildings. The problems are the reflective qualities of glass. I mean, look in a mirror, you can see yourself. A bird's not going to see itself, it's going to see a tree or a bush or a shrub reflected in that glass. Just as important are the transparent qualities of glass, whether it's curtain walls, corners of buildings, or railings. All of these also contribute, and railings, clear glass railings, are again one of the things that we are seeing very, very rapidly rise on the landscape, even in places where they never used to be there. So when you're looking at cottage country or places on the coast where we are a transparent society, everybody wants to see outside what they want to see, what other people are doing, but they also want to see everything around them. And the old spindle style railings are rapidly being replaced by the transparent railings. And unfortunately, we did a cottage show years ago where people would come up to us and say, yes, we put the transparent railings in, and we started getting pileated woodpeckers and ruffed grouse hitting. And those are pretty decent sized birds. So when they hit, you know that there's a problem. So you need to do something. We're not saying remove all of this. What we are saying is make all these things safe for birds. Bird-friendly development guidelines. This is something we have worked on for many, many years. And in fact, the city of Toronto was the first city in the world to publish mandatory bird-friendly development guidelines in partnership with FLAC Canada. Since then, many other cities across North America have published their own guidelines. Many of them are still voluntary, unfortunately. Some of them are mandatory. And in fact, recent publications in New York City have made one of the stiffest guidelines out there, which is really nice to see. Something that's new on the landscape for bird-friendly are bird-friendly cities. And in Ontario, there's several cities now that have been certified bird-friendly. I don't know what there is in Nova Scotia, to be honest, but it is a Canada-wide initiative through Nature Canada, of which FLAP is one of the stakeholders. So what you will see is there are certain criteria that have to be met in order to be certified as a bird-friendly city. And if Halifax, or depending on where you live, wants to jump on this bandwagon, there are submission dates in 2024 that you can submit your city to see if you qualify to be bird friendly. So if you need the information, I can give it to the end of the presentation, but the dates are there. Or you can always email us to get that information, or just go to Bird Friendly City, their website. As I mentioned earlier, in Canada, there is regulatory protection now, stemming from two lawsuits that happened in around 2010, 2012. One is now under the Species at Risk Act, one is the Environmental Protection Act, and this applies to specific species, obviously. Theoretically, using the Environmental Protection Act in Ontario, however, most of us would actually be breaking the law, because I would guarantee you most of us don't have our windows treated with something that is bird friendly or shows the bird that there is something there besides the reflected image. A little bit of the history. So back in 2007, the bird friendly development guidelines came out and was revised in 2016. This again is for the City of Toronto. The Toronto Green Standard made bird-friendly design mandatory. Unfortunately, the first version was very weak. We pushed for a much stronger version, but the city caved. It bowed to pressure. However, version 4, which came out a couple of years ago, has finally, even though it's taken thousands of birds to die in order to get this to happen, has finally mandated proper guidelines to prevent birds from colliding. Unfortunately, for now, this is only for new construction. Moving forward, we are hoping one day to get a retrofit standard that will apply to all buildings moving forward from there. The two lawsuits that I mentioned in 2011 and 2013, and this is important, in 2019, the Canadian Standards Association, of which FLAP was a stakeholder, released bird-friendly design guidelines. And what we are hoping to do is see these guidelines implemented into provincial building codes and into federal building codes. And these guidelines are tight, but there's always room for improvement. And if you want to get free access, you can go to the link that I put in the website there, or in the presentation there. And the free access is actually provided by Feather Friendly, a group that we work very, very closely with. It's important to have those guidelines because unfortunately, voluntary measures have proven to not be effective. You need to have mandatory measures. In 2021, we partnered with a provincial MPP, Chris Glover, to have the Building Code campaign underway, and he introduced a motion in the provincial parliament to have the CSA standard adopted. Unfortunately, with all the political upheaval that happens with most political parties, that is still, nothing has happened with that, but we are still pushing for it. So, you know what? You need to know what doesn't work so you don't waste your time and money putting up something. And what doesn't work is something dispelling myths. So plastic owls really don't work, and this is usually for pigeons, but people have used them for other birds as well. The typical anti-strike tool, if you will, that most people without doing their homework like to use is the bird of prey decal. And typically it's one decal that is placed on a window, possibly two, but the most of the window is still open and untreated. And if you look where my cursor is, you can see this whole area around the bird of prey is still reflecting the environment. Birds aren't stupid, they know it's not a real bird of prey, so they're not going to strike in this area because there's nothing reflected there, but they will strike in areas around it. In order to be effective, this particular product has lines like this. And I have yet to see a window anywhere that has used this this particular product in this particular manner. So don't waste your money unless you're planning on doing something like this. There is technology evolution that has developed over the years, and we're looking at specific guidelines for spacing, for contrast, and for density. Nowadays, the rule of thumb is 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. So it's the 2 by 2. Some people say 2 by 4, but we prefer to use the 2 by 2 rule because that accounts for the smaller species like the kinglets and the hummingbirds. Anything spacing bigger than that, some of the tinier birds could potentially think that they could fly through the spacing. You need to have contrast and you need to have coverage. If you only put 1 or 2 decals up, you don't have enough coverage. You need to have at least 85% of your window covered with a contrasting marker, whether you put dots on or you put decals or anything else. The coverage is important and the contrast is important. If you have a dark visual marker on a dark background, it really doesn't pop out. You have a pale marker on a dark background, completely different. Pale marker on a pale background, again, difficult. If it's difficult for us to see, I'll guarantee you it's extremely difficult for the birds to see because these guys are flying in split-second timing. And many times it's too late for them to realize what's happening, and that's when they hit the window. So you need a pale background, you want a contrasting dark marker. If you want, you can go with duotone, so you have all light conditions covered, dark and light markers. And these are just a few examples of things that you can do to your window to give adequate coverage and contrast to make a window safe. Now, I cannot stress this enough. Any visual marker that you put on your window has to be on the first surface. Otherwise, it will not work as effectively as you hope it would. First surface, or surface 1, is the first surface of the glass. So if you have a double pane of glass, the back of the first pane is surface 2. Then the second pane has surface 3 and surface 4. The further back in the layers you go, the less effective those markers are going to be. And the best way I can describe this for you to see whether your windows are safe or not is take a look at the image on the screen. This could be your place, 10 o'clock in the morning. You could look at your window and you could see right inside. It's completely transparent because of the way the light falls on the glass. However, as the sun moves in the sky and the daylight changes throughout the day, by afternoon, that same window could look like this. So you see the habitat reflected. When that happens, that is likely when you're going to get bird strikes. The best way I can suggest for you to look, if you think your windows either may be a problem or you know they're a problem because you've heard the birds or you've found them, go out, first light in the morning, take a picture of a window that you think is a potential problem. Every hour of the day, that one day, go outside and take a picture of the same window, and then look at all the pictures in a row and see what you're seeing. Are you seeing transparency? Are you seeing reflectivity? If you are, then you need to do something for that window to stop birds from hitting. Prevention tips for commercial buildings. There's many different products out there now. 10, 15 years ago, there was almost nothing, and it was a challenge to get any commercial building to get on board with putting something on their windows, because what was available was expensive and really not realistically feasible for many of these buildings. Having said that, many of these buildings are multi-million-dollar buildings, so most things that you can put on glass now, it's literally a drop in the bucket for them. So they can definitely afford it, and they factor it into the cost of their building anyway. So it really is not very much. Whether you're using window films or exterior sunshades, grill work or fritting, digital printing and etching, and silk screening, these are just a few examples. When it comes to residential buildings, same thing applies. Exterior sunshades or grill work, fritting, window films. You can do painting and drawing. You can be as creative as you want. And we've always said, treat your window as a canvas. If you've got kids or grandkids, get them to paint something. We had one nursery school that every spring, the students cut out flowers, tulips and daffodils, and then put them on the outside of the window. Come summer, they put sunflowers. Come autumn, they put brightly colored leaves. And come winter, they put snowflakes. So this was a nursery school. If the nursery school can do it, there's no excuse for anyone else not to. Different things that you might want to find worth considering, and I know not everyone wants to put something directly on their glass, either because they're renting perhaps, or they might nullify the warranty on the glass, but you can easily use a screen. And in fact, nowadays, screens are, when you look at new construction, most of the screen windows that we have, the screen is on the inside, which is a shame, because if it were on the outside, it would actually be very effective. People, and especially birders, often ask, well, will it affect my view? These are two images. One of these has a screen on it, one of them doesn't. You don't have to put your hand up or yell, but the top one has a screen, the bottom one does not. Your view from the window through that screen is barely affected. So there's no excuse. Something else that is effective, and this was something I happened to see in Costa Rica. You can get them called Acopian bird savers or Zen curtains. You can make your own. It's paracord that is hung on the outside of a window. It's not attached except at the top and will move in the breeze, and will actually be a visual cue for birds to not collide because of the spacing. This is the view from the inside, does not affect it in any way whatsoever. This particular product has been flying off the shelves. I've got to say, nothing good has come out of the pandemic for us, except so many people were working from home and they realized what we've been saying all these years. The homes kill millions of birds a year. And why is that? Because people were home, they were noticing it. The companies that made the products could not keep the stock on the shelves. It was literally flying out the door. This particular product is called Feather Friendly. You can get it online. You can measure it by what space you're covering. And the shelf life or life expectancy of this product is anywhere from 8 to 15 years. Very easy to apply. That's your view from the inside. Does not affect you looking out. And I take pictures of birds in my garden all the time. All I do is position the lens through the space on the dots, and I'm fine with the pictures. So these are just a few products that you can get available. And one thing that is important to note, and this is something people don't realize, feeders. There's a huge push certainly in Ontario, I can't speak for Nova Scotia, but to get rid of invasive species and to bring in native plantings. Native plantings, bird feeders, you're hoping to draw birds in. And in fact, that was part of the conversation before the presentation started, that people aren't seeing birds at their feeders right now. When the birds come in though, if you place your feeder in a way that it's reflected in the window, you're drawing the bird in with the feeder, but you could be killing it with that feeder reflection in the window. In order to be safe, that feeder has to be 1.5 feet or less from the window. Even better if it's right up close, because as the birds are flying towards the feeder, they're applying the brakes the closer they get to that feeder. And if they do happen to miss that feeder and bounce off the window, they're not going at full tilt. If you look at the image on the right-hand side, this particular homeowner, you can see all the feeders that they have here. It's relatively close to the window, but they continue to get window strikes. And the reason is, if you look at the middle panel here, you can see right through from one side of the house to the other. The birds could see the trees reflected through that transparent window, and they also had feeders on the other side. So it took a little bit of convincing, but they did manage to change where they placed their feeders. One of the things that I know many people, and it's one of the most contentious issues when it comes to cat owners, keeping your cats indoors. Cats are the #1 killer of not just songbirds, but wildlife. And in fact, there was a study done by Environment Canada that said an estimated 196 million birds, just birds alone, die every year in Canada because of cats. Cats are brutal. And a lot of people say, well, my cat doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't need to. When you look at the birds that have ended up in rehab, magnolia warblers, all the other high arboreal species, they're flying, they hit a window, they bounce off the window, they come down on the deck where your cat is sitting out there. That cat picks up the bird, takes it in. If the bird is alive and makes it to rehab, that component of why the bird is in rehab is missing. It's only the cat that brought it home. But you look at the species and you know for a fact the magnolia warblers are typically not within a cat's range for catching. So that it's vitally important that you please, please, please consider either keeping your cat inside or supervise when outside. It's better for the cat too, and absolutely, definitely better for wildlife. If you want to, aside from taking photos of your windows, if you have a building at work or at school, or you want to do a quick assessment of your home, you can go to the FLAP app. There's an algorithm calculation on there. You can answer yes or no to 22 questions, and it will give you a threat rating for each facade that you are rating. And if that's the case, whether you have low risk, moderate risk, high risk, or lethal, that may help you decide where you want to apply your window treatments the most. If you have low risk, don't go there. If you have high risk or lethal, those are the ones you want to focus on, because you're going to save the most lives by putting even the simplest of markers on the external surface. Global Bird Rescue. This is a global initiative that we founded a number of years ago. It started off with just a few teams going out 1 week in the full migration, looking for birds in their neighborhood. It has expanded to over 50 groups worldwide, making it a truly global effort. And what we do is we map on an online tool any bird collisions that we see anywhere in the world. So we've had people report bird collisions from the middle of the Sea of Japan. They were on a cruise ship and birds were colliding with a cruise ship. We've had bird collisions from North America, South America, Central America, Australia, New Zealand. I don't think we've had anything from Antarctica yet, possibly because that's one of the few places that perhaps you don't get that many issues with bird window collisions. But the numbers are staggering. And in fact, you'll notice in the next slide coming up, no, you won't, it'll be the one after that. For reporting window collisions, you can go to My Survey 123. You can go to the Global Bird Collision Mapper. You can sign up for it. There's 2 apps that we've produced. You can do a bird-friendly building survey. You can also report a bird window collision, live or dead. Even if you see it and the bird flies off and you don't know the species, you can still report that collision. There's a reporting tool and a list of things on there that you can just click on and submit. And so if you go to the bird-friendly building survey, if you happen to see a building somewhere that has effective markers on it, you can report it on this app. If you happen to see a building somewhere that is horrible and you can see that birds are colliding on a regular basis, you can also report it on this app too. You click on collect on the bottom and a series of questions will open up for you. To report a collision, the same thing, you go to the Global Bird Collision Mapper. You do not have to be a registered user. You can enter as a guest. There are teams on there. I happen to be a member of Flat Canada. So any report that I enter will be assigned to Flat Canada. And again, in the Global Bird Rescue, we have teams across the world. We have individuals across the world. And the reports that come in are in real time. You can see how many birds are being reported at the same time that you're reporting a bird. So please have a look at that if you decide you want to use it. It's a great way of doing it. I know some people use iNaturalist. We're hoping to work with them to get their numbers as well. Currently, the numbers for the Global Bird Collision Mapper are just under 100,000. These are numbers from, I'll be honest with you, the majority of them are from Flat Canada. We've been entering our numbers since 1993. However, we lost data from 1993 to 1999. So the numbers are actually underreported on this tool. As we are finding all data and information, we are entering it, and you can do historical entries as well. I happen to click on the mapper numbers for Nova Scotia and for New Brunswick. Yes, when you look at the grand scheme of things, 97,000 plus birds, and you look at 9 in Halifax, 10 in St. John, 5 in Fredericton, 13 up, I think that's Cape Breton. But the numbers are low, not because it doesn't happen, but because nobody is reporting them. So I'm hoping even if 10 people from this chat find out a bird somewhere and report it, that will increase the numbers that you see in Nova Scotia, because I guarantee you most of the bird collisions go unreported. Why should we care? High school student athletes. Obviously, you know about insect control, and the birds pollinate plants and distribute seeds, massive part of the food chain, and they are one of the fastest growing hobbies across North America. And it's not just, you know, the bird guide and the Tilly hat and the binoculars. It's the gas to go where you're going. You're stopping off at Tim Hortons for your double and box of Timbits. Combined, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And unfortunately, with the state of birds right now and the numbers dropping, it's going to be that much harder for people to take part in it. But the beauty is you don't have to go to these places. If you're very fortunate, the birds come to you. And that's the one thing we really, really wanted to get across in the pandemic. It was something that you could appreciate and enjoy without having to go there. Hopefully, you would either have received your copy of the Home Safer Birds brochure, or they will be distributed at one of your meetings. We sent them to, I think it was you a while ago, right? It wasn't just you got
we distributed it at the AGM this year.
Okay. This brochure lists many of the things that I've mentioned in the presentation, including the website that you can access. You can always go to flap@flap.org, but it's also in French. We do recommend that when you get your brochure, please read it and please pass it on. And I've got to tell you, birders are some of the biggest people, the biggest challenges that we face in trying to get people to convinced to do something about their windows, because they want to enjoy birds. They don't want to put something on the glass that stops them from doing them. Some of the things that I suggested will convince you that you can have both. And we are on various social media platforms. You can email us at any time. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We have some great videos on YouTube. And any questions? And thank you for allowing me to come into your home today. I'll stop screen sharing if I am good at this. Stop share. There we go. Okay.
Great, and we got the good screen back, so I can see everything again, and you're not looking at my home screen. We've got a few questions in the
I see that.
the chat. Let's have a look.
Okay. I wonder what might be key contributing factors to the risk of winter collisions, and what could individuals and organizations, regulatory bodies do differently to help? Okay, key contributing factors to the risks. I think I've covered a good chunk of those. Mostly transparent and reflectivity, but it's actually not just glass. We've had birds collide with highly polished marble surfaces. So again, any surface, a car window. I have great video of a cardinal that was trying to defend the mirror against an invading cardinal, which was himself. And in fact, cardinals and robins are two of the most common birds that we get calls about, especially in the spring, because hormones are going rampant and they're really, really busting their buns to try and defend their territory. So it's in size, does not matter, you know, car window to big picture window. But the key factors for individuals and organizations, that's a bit of a challenge. Organizations, the more people that speak up, and this is something, one of the slides that I took out, because otherwise I'd be doing this all night and you'd be really bored. And I can talk on this topic for hours, just so if you need me to shut up, tell me to shut up. But one of the key factors is, since we started doing this, and we were the first organization in the world to do this, since then, we are seeing countries across the globe, but especially cities across North America, that have now jumped on the bird-friendly bandwagon. Many of these cities now have collision monitoring groups that take part, and they approach their municipal offices, they approach their state offices or their provincial offices, and they ask that something be done. And one of the biggest factors in reporting birds on the Global Bird Collision Mapper, you're reporting a bird, so the collision does not go unnoticed, the death is not forgotten or not seen, but it adds numbers. And you look at the image that I showed earlier on, of that image of all the birds in the layout, 1 or 2 birds, yeah, it's sad, it's depressing. 5,000 birds in one image, that's a staggering number of birds, and it's that much of a visual impact that causes people to say, we need to do something. And if you think, for example, you work in a building downtown and you find 1 or 2 birds and you enter them into the Global Bird Collision Mapper, and then someone else that works with you happens to also find a few birds and enters them into the mapper, over time, those entries build up, and you can find the numbers there to go to that management and say, hey, did you know this building birds are dying at? What can you do about it? And that's where change starts, and that's where conversation starts. And it's a way to build on that. And I have to say that for us in the financial district, where we first started, the TD Centre, so the Toronto Dominion Centre, it's a group of iconic buildings right in the financial district. That was the catalyst for FLAP when we first started doing this. And we would be fighting the street cleaners, we would be fighting the gulls, the raccoons, the opossums, just to pick up the birds. Since then, and it's taken us almost 30 years, but they got there in the end. Cadillac Fairview, the owners of the Toronto Dominion Centre, finally applied the correct visual markers to almost all their buildings. Strikes plummeted, literally went down. And I have to say, this happened during the first couple of years of the pandemic. We still patrolled, and I have to say, there was no mask big enough to hide all our smiles as we walked by the TD Centre and we could see the dots on the windows. And just that one example, and we've seen that at other buildings that have now been retrofit, using the data that is on this public tool. The joy that we are seeing in our volunteers not finding all these dead birds anymore, not even finding live birds, because it's not happening. And once you get that momentum going, that's the impetus that you need to get something done. And if nothing else, you only enter 1 or 2 or 10, but collectively, that's a lot of birds for this group. And the photos, you can put in photos, you don't need to know the species. It's not important. What is important is that record is made. And that's where I cannot stress enough that we need that information. And I'm hoping that it doesn't happen, but if it does happen in Nova Scotia that you do see bird collisions, please, please, please make that effort. And I know Barb, I can see her on the call, and I'm going to address a question, but I don't know if the first one I'm reading is from you. No, it's from Rui, sorry. But I'm gonna touch on something that Barb emailed us about earlier. So I hope, Rui, I answered your question very long-windedly, but I hope I answered it.
Oh, no, like that's an excellent answer. And thank you so much for your amazing work that really makes such a difference. I hope that with the improvement in like advocacy and awareness, ultimately like window manufacturers would just make windows like that are basically bird collision proof on the outside. And that'll be like the easiest and most cost efficient way to do this en masse.
Absolutely, and in fact, many buildings in Toronto, because of the newest version of the Green Standard, they know that they have to have markers put on. And you're right, it is most cost efficient to have it applied before the glass is put on. So if they want to save money, that's about the best way of doing it. Okay, now I wonder if there may be any noteworthy infectious hazards while rescuing. There's always a risk. I have to say we follow all Environment Canada and climate change guidelines when it comes to any potential threat to human health. The latest one has been the avian flu. But I have to say that we've been extremely fortunate. Most of the, well, relatively speaking, most of the birds that we actually work with are the passerines or the songbirds. Very few birds that are more at risk to, say, avian flu are birds of prey, waterfowl, shorebirds. We don't get that many in comparison to the sheer numbers of the songbirds that we do get. There's always a risk of lice or mites or pigeon flies or hippoboscid flies, flat flies. But I have to say we're always extremely careful. Our volunteers are well trained. And to the best of my knowledge, touch wood, nobody has ever contracted anything. If anyone does have companion birds at home, we always recommend that they, completely wash their hands. And some people will actually go so far as to change their clothing before they go in the house. So, as long as you're very, very careful and you practice good hygiene, there should be little to no risk of you contracting anything. I hope that answered that question.
Oh, absolutely. That's very reassuring to know. And I think since we are either rescuing these birds or sadly burying or sending to a museum and institutes those birds that died from the incident, maybe it might be a good chance for them to collect any microbiology and parasite data as well, so that it helps with research and preservation and public health on multiple fronts.
Well, I will say that of all and unfortunately we have donated, ridiculous numbers of birds to the museum. Many of those do end up going for scientific studies. So any person that, one of the studies was a muscle mass study. They needed to study specific species of birds and the muscle mass on them, how much they had during the migration season. And so you've got a wealth of information and a wealth of ability to get that information using these birds. So they do serve a secondary purpose. And we would always be grateful for that secondary purpose. So they didn't die in vain, which is a horrible way of putting it, but it always helps to have them used for something else. And we've participated in several scientific studies and in several scientific papers as well. So in a way, there is that education component, but it really does help to be able to use them in another format, so to speak. And we've been very fortunate to work with a lot of artists who have taken the specimens that we donated and literally brought them back to life on canvas. And it's a beautiful testament to these birds, and again, to show that they're not being forgotten. So it's a horrendous loss of life, but there is, you know, some way to continue that a little bit more. Let me just see, save questions. Oh, good. You have a bird-friendly city designation. Well done. Oh, when did you get certified?
Probably 2 years ago.
Something like
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, good to know. Congratulations. Are you up for recertification now? If it was 2 years ago?
we might be. The team, we don't have anyone from the society on the team right now. But yeah, and actually right near me, we've got Kentville's applying for Bird Friendly Town. So I'm involved in that too. So
Excellent. Yeah, I'm seeing a huge increase in smaller towns in Ontario doing that. So it's just nice to see that. I know the city of Toronto was given it, but they actually dropped in certification because there was a big brouhaha with the council. There was a huge public push to get free roaming cats banned, and the city did not go with it. They chose not to ban them. And that actually dropped the level of certification, which I'm very happy about. So if they want to up it again, they're going to have to work damn hard to earn it. So congratulations on that. News release reporting, okay. London, yes. Oh, good. I was actually going to mention, you know that there's not that many numbers on the Global Bird Collision Mapper, but if you go to both, is it Hope for Wildlife, and you go to, is it Cobequid? I don't know, is that pronounced right? Okay, you go to either one of those and ask them how many patients they receive that are known to be bird window collision victims. I guarantee you there's a lot. Again, they're just not on the mapper. So that's why it's so important to record that report. Will the website share the info about? The good thing is Feather Friendly has updated their product for the residential application, and it's not just rolls, it's actually sheets. So if it's tedious putting on rolls, you don't have to do it anymore. I believe you can now purchase their product in a sheet. So you put the sheet on, you peel the sheet off, and the rows are there if it makes it easier. It can be tedious and you have to scrape on everything, but I will tell you it is totally well worth it because I have large picture windows, patio doors here, and I have feeders that are reflected in there. And when I put the dots up lately, I've been watching the juncos. I've been flooded by juncos. And when something spooks them, of course, they panic and go every which way. I've watched them fly directly to the glass, and I've watched them steer away at the last minute. And I'm just, yeah, it was worth putting it up. So in Germany, no, hang on, wrong one. Okay, so hopefully it answered Wendy's question. Okay, in Germany, it's also a great issue. Okay, no worries. Thank you for joining us, Hydron. Do you have any links to the bird-friendly screens? It's called Bird Savers. Bird Screens, I apologize, Bird Screens. But there should be a link in the brochure that you hopefully will get. You can always go to our website, and there's all the products and more listed that I mentioned. So you can scroll through and see what you like and what you don't like. It also tells you more products that aren't very good. So Window Alert is not very good. Those are the UV decals that people, they come in about a pack of 5 or 6. They're shaped like a hummingbird or they're shaped like a maple leaf. And again, unless you cover the entire window, it's really not going to work. So don't waste your money on that one either. Thank you, Barb. Yes, you're right.
Paloma, I have several questions. I don't know how many you want me to actually ask.
Hey, you got my time. I can talk all night. You don't want it, but I can.
All right. Before I start going on and on, Tony, how much time do you want to keep this under?
Oh, hey, see how it goes, Danny.
Okay. So I guess one that I've been wanting to know for a while is like over the last year, we've been hearing that when birds hit windows, whether they look okay or not, like you were talking about earlier, that they need to go to the rehab, whether we think they look fine or not, because of underlying injuries we can't see. So what I've been wondering is, now that we're hearing all the time that these birds are dying shortly after, how do we know that these birds have been dying shortly after the window collisions? Are we finding them like in nearby, and then after examining them, they have specific injuries that are only caused from window strikes, or where's that information coming from?
I would say a lot of it is birds that do fly away, because we see it happening. We see the bird colliding. It comes down. It will fly off, but we will follow it, and then we can capture it. And those birds go to rehab, and then many of them don't make it. And so based on what we are seeing in the victims that are being captured and assessed, you look at the injuries and people say, oh, it looked fine, it flew off fine. But just because it flies off, and again, I'm talking to people, they say, oh, it had a broken wing, but it flew off. So we know it didn't have a broken wing, but the wing was down. It could have had an issue that way. Sometimes the beaks get broken, as you could see in the picture of the flicker, but it's not just the tip of the beak, it's broken right up by the cere. The biggest concern that we have are the eye ulcers. Those are ones that it's very, very difficult to diagnose visually without the right tools. And this is something that we work very closely with our local rehab center, and they keep us posted on all the different ailments that they are seeing in birds that have, that we've taken to them. Depending on the species, some of them don't do well in rehab, especially the high stress birds. Some of the birds do extremely well in rehab and can actually be overwintered. But we have had reports from people who have seen a bird hit a window, it flew off, it went into the neighbor's garden, and it was found later to be dead. And I guess if you do, and there have been studies and postmortems done, that you could see the nature of the injury that the bird sustained at that time. So I don't know if that answered your question properly, but it does indicate that it does happen.
I guess like the other biggest question I have is, now that you guys have been doing this for 30 years, you've obviously talked to a lot of companies, whether it's executives or small business owners or what have you. Is it basically the refusal solely based on cost, or how they think it's going to make the building look worse than it is, or what are you finding?
You touched on two of the major things. Depending on buildings, that many buildings, they still have the architect very much involved in the building, and they have a caveat that their building is designed in a certain way. You cannot add something to it. You cannot change the design because it affects the aesthetics of the building. And this we were seeing with the Toronto Dominion Centre, and the architect died a few years ago, but it was the follow through on that. So that's one reason. The second reason will be cost, because they're saying, well, it's going to cost us too much. We have 70 floors, it's going to cost us millions of dollars to do that. The risk assessment that we have developed for commercial buildings is such that we will go on site. We will do, like the one I showed you for the home owner's assessment, we do a more in-depth assessment. For commercial buildings, we go on site, we assess every facade of the building, and then we make a determination from there which facade should be done. So instead of unilaterally just slapping on some kind of visual marker on one side of a building without doing the risk assessment, you are in effect saving money by getting the risk assessment done, because you could have, we'll just take a square building. 3 sides of that building are brick, or mostly brick with small windows. The 4th side is sheer reflective glass. You decide to spend money on the windows that are smaller because it's going to be less expensive. Yet the majority, in fact, I would say 99.999% of birds colliding with that building will collide on the side where the sheer glass is. So you spend all this effort, time, and money on treating an area that really has very few strikes and completely ignore the area where the majority of the strikes occur. So in effect, you're not being effective in your money management. So the risk assessment really does save money in the long run, unless you have a building that every single facade is lethal. And unfortunately, we do have buildings that do have that, but we've worked with them based on the information that our volunteers have documented over the years. Again, you can look at the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. And this is one phrase that people have said to us over the years: show me the numbers. And that number makes all the difference. So it needs to be a credible number. And that was one of the things that in one of the lawsuits, the defense counsel tried to discredit, saying that we inflated our numbers, that we made up all different things. And the judge in question found us to be extremely credible, and our data was very, very accurate. And he commended us on the accuracy and quality of our data. So it's important to be real about it, which is why the photos help, because it can actually show that something has occurred. You can enter something, and we hope you won't do that, because if you lose that credibility, you lose that impact on getting something done at a building. So I hope, now one thing we are pushing for is to have bird-friendly markers as part of LEED credit or BOMA credit. And if that's the case, because they've all the different types of credits and the levels and ratings in their credits, if we can get bird-friendly markers as part of that and get the government to actually give, there's a word for it, but right now I've drawn a complete blank. Tax breaks for applying for bird-friendly markers, then we're hoping that that would also be an incentive for buildings to do that too. And it would be nice if they do the right thing anyway, but the numbers speak volumes. Did that answer that question well enough?
For the most part, yes. So like there's one building that I have in mind in my area that is like the windows are quite glossy. They've got some weird coating on them. So it's been there for decades. So I have no idea how many birds have collided with that over the years, or how many each year, or if any, for example, but I'm sure there's several. So without anyone going around their building collecting data of that, if let's say Nova Scotia Bird Society or myself or something contacted them, how do we contact these corporations and say, hey, you have reflective glass, birds can't see what we can see, you most likely have hundreds of birds hitting your windows each year and don't know about it? How do we start that conversation and basically convince them? Is it showing them your data, or is there a lot more to it?
No, it's actually walking in, and if they have a sustainability committee, it's a good starting block. I'll be honest with you, taking the time to look at the building during migration, and you can certainly go to something called Birdcast, which can, it's mostly for the US right now, though we're working with the designers to get it up in Canada too. But you can look at the weather patterns and determine whether or not there's going to be strong movement. And if we're looking at daytime collisions, then it's a little different, but overnight conditions, and if it's a tall building with lights on, then it could be a potential threat. If it's close to the water, it's often a potential threat. But if you look at the surrounding habitat, and again, you go to that risk assessment, and if the building is reflective, but it's reflecting another building, it may not be as big a threat as you think. If it's reflecting the environment or greenery, then yes, it's a potential. And quite frankly, you don't need to see a bird there to know that a bird has collided. You can look at the parameters of what causes bird window collisions, but you can also look at the glass. And if you see dust imprints on the glass, and some of the birds, when they do hit, you will actually see the feather outline and the face and the body, the dust imprint they're called dust images or ghost images. You can see those on the glass. There's no body underneath, but you know a bird hit the window there. And that's often another way of documenting. You may not know the species, but I have to tell you, I have seen owl imprints that you clearly see it's an owl. I have seen a rail. You could see the length of the beak, the shape of the head. You could tell it was a Virginia rail that hit a window. So it's not always accurate, but you can tell that something is said. And if you can, even if you get one person checking, the more, even if it's 1 hour a day or 1 hour every other day, you know, as long as you're consistent in your monitoring. And the one thing about the Global Bird Collision Mapper, if you're reporting, you can also report that you have patrolled and no birds were found, because that's important too. And that's something for a building that used to get bird strikes, that has actually spent the money to do a retrofit, and that they are getting reports that no birds are being found. It is vital to have that before and after number to show that what they have done has actually benefited birds.
Okay, thank you. I think the biggest thing about that is just in my head off the bat here is we always want to be preemptive instead of reactive. So have you many times been able to convince office owners or business owners to put the proper safety parameters in place on their glass without first showing them, hey, there's this many birds died last year on your windows? But have you had success going to the company and saying, hey, we know this is happening, without doing a walk around during the spring migration, and got them to change before it happens?
I would like to say yes, but in reality, no. It always boils down to show me the numbers. There is a science to it. You can quote all the science you want, but people want to see the actual numbers, which is a horrible way of doing it.
Thank you. Tony, how are we doing for time? And is there anyone else that wants to ask questions before I go on and on?
Time is marching on, but I mean, if you got one more question, Danny, go ahead.
All right. Does anyone else have a question?
I just had a quick question. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
All good, Dom.
Just for that global bird collision mapper, just remind me, I think you said it, but can I go and enter historical collisions?
Absolutely. You can go back to 1899.
Okay, great. And I see it's a survey 123, which is everything.
Yes.
So what are the minimum like you need time and location? Do you need a photo for that? No, that one you can. Okay.
In order to go back into historical data, you need the date.
Yeah.
Time is not as important.
Yeah.
You can put unknown in there. The species, it helps, but you can also put unknown in there. And the side is important. So
right.
If you know the address, that's great.
Yes.
If you know the side of that building, that's even better. But yes,
Okay.
just make sure, because everything is in real time. So when you go to report a collision, it's assuming you're reporting one now.
Yes.
If you make sure that you go back to the right date.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
good. And if and does that survey 123 also take photos?
Yes. Oh yes,
Yes.
very much. You can load up to 3 photos.
Okay, and it does, yeah, and it can be like ones I have saved on my computer, because I think I could go back and find a few of the birds I found, you know, on old, you know, you have folders of cell phone photos from years ago, and one of them has the bird that you know, saw. So, okay, great. That answers my question.
Excellent. Thank you. So I look forward to seeing an increase in numbers for Nova Scotia then.
Well, some of them are not in Nova Scotia, actually. So,
oh, that's okay. Hey, global. It's global, so wherever, Go for it.
Thanks.
I'm just going to look at this question from Rui again. I saw a bunch of pigeons striking. Oh. Okay, yeah. It's interesting. If you see or hear about bird window collisions on TV or anything in shows, it's often just in passing. And I know that there was one on. I'm brain dead tonight. I'm sorry. It was a Toronto show, and I remember seeing something about a bird window collision there, and it boggled me that they would just write it off and just laugh at it and keep going. But the whole thing about the issue is more and more people are talking about it. It's the awareness has grown significantly, and when I was in Costa Rica a few years ago, of course, our volunteers have this mantra that I've always told them is once you flap, you can't go back. So if you know what causes a window collision, and no matter where you are in the world, you're thinking, okay, that window's bad. Can I see a bird there? Is there a bird there? If so, report it. And yeah, much to my husband's chagrin, because I do that everywhere I go. I'm pointing at all the bad windows. But it's important to get that in there. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I knew what I was looking for, and I found a bird. And the photos do help again. Don't always help to identify the species, but it just goes to show that you've made that effort. And I can't stress that enough. That the more people out there doing this, the more reports being generated, the more conversations being started, the more pains being treated. And that's all we can do. Is our goal is one pain at a time. And it's taken us 30 years to get to where we are. It's just amazing to see so many cities now on board with it, so many people doing it. A drop in the bucket, absolutely. But as more and more people are aware of it and more products are available and they're more reasonable in cost, then I really do think that this is going to grow much, much bigger than what it is now.
Paloma, do you have a rough number on what all these buildings that have gone ahead and adapted have had to spend to make that adaptation, whether it's like $1,000 for every 10 square feet or what have you, between labor, machinery?
I know one particular building that was actually a retrofit that we sent. This was years ago. We sent a bunch of letters out to different buildings that had high number collisions. And one particular building in question was 33 Yonge Street. So I don't know if anybody knows Toronto, but anyway, 33 Yonge Street. It encompassed an entire city block. And there was one facade, the east facade, that faced a park. And the spring was relatively quiet, but the autumn was brutal, especially in chickadee eruption years, because for some reason that was the route that chickadees would take moving through downtown. And we got so many calls from members of the public who were outside on this recessed alcove that was the entryway to this building. And they'd be with their cigarette and their coffee having their break. And flocks of chickadees would take off from the tree in the park across the road, hit directly above them, and literally just land on the people underneath. We sent the building a letter. They're one of the first buildings to voluntarily retrofit based on the risk assessment that we did. And they spent about $100,000. The product itself is not expensive. It's the machinery and the equipment that you need to rent if you don't have it, like a high ranger or a cherry picker, to apply it. That's where your expenses go up. So going back to the suggestion of pre-treated windows, absolutely, it's going to save you money. And yes, many buildings, when we speak to them and we do the risk assessment, they realize the cost involved. They break it down by lethal, high risk, medium, low risk. And then we suggest you treat the lethal ones. They allocate a specific amount of their capital budget for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and they work from the risk down, the high risk down, all the way to no risk at all. And we completely understand that it is a high cost, but the greater cost in lives is staggering. And so many buildings, the ones that we have approached now that have done this work, they actually feel good about it too, and their tenants feel good. And to go back to one of the things that someone said about convincing, many of the buildings in Toronto put a banner in their lobby during migration that says lights out. That is the total amount of participation that some of these buildings do. All they do is put up a banner. They put the onus on the tenants to turn the lights out, not the buildings themselves. However, some buildings have now actively changed their lighting to motion lighting, especially at night. They've also altered their cleaning schedule, so their cleaners actually start earlier and finish earlier in the night so that the lights aren't on. And so we have seen a significant drop in specific levels of lighting. You could go to downtown and you could have a 70-story building where the first 10 floors would be lit up. Then there'd be a little gap of, 3 or 4 dark floors. There'd be another 5 floors, all lit up, because we are a 24-hour society. There's always someone working somewhere. So motion lighting, direction lighting. So instead of pointing outwards where you have spill light, you pointed task lighting inward. You pull blinds down. They have made a big difference for nighttime lighting. And combining that with all the other things, we have found that if you appeal to, and it helps to have a champion on your side within a building. And what we are seeing within the industry is many building owners and managers that have worked in one building where they've had the changes done and then moved to another building within that corporation, they now work at getting something done at that new building. So it helps to have those people on your side. And we are not what we call an aggressive group. We don't go out picketing, or we don't do things like that. We found we have better success with the carrot and the stick than doing the crazy advocacy and protesting and things like that. That's just not who we are, and it's taken us a long time to get to where we are. But we've seen such a huge increase in the understanding of the issue, in the mitigation of the issue in the last 5 or 10 years, that we really, really hope to see an even bigger push in the next 5 or 10 years, so that we can basically put ourselves out of this, which is a weird way of putting it.
Beautiful. Anybody else got any questions at all?
Okay, in that case, I'm going to answer one for Bob, who emailed us. Michael did email you back, Bob. The person that I had reached out to has not contacted me for the results of the study that you were asking about. But Michael did send you his direct link. So if you want to reach out to him, you should have that in an email.
Paloma, it's Danny Cameron, by the way, that's asking these questions. I have more. Is there an email that I can send you these questions, or a time to chat in the future?
Absolutely. Barb, I know Danny was asking the questions, but Barb had emailed us about a question. And so I wanted to respond to her question because I hoped she was going to be on this chat. So, but absolutely, you can either contact me directly at pplant@flat.org. So pplant@flat.org, or you can reach us directly at flat.org. I just a precursor here, because I am officially retired, you're going to get an automatic message saying I've gone birding, and to reach out to other people, but I still have access to those emails, and I'm more than happy to respond to you.
Thank you. Congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Joe? We're good, folks? Fantastic. Thank you very much for a fascinating subject. And I think you'll see an increase in your website and media traffic in the next few days as people are checking things out. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I've done my job. Thank you.
Fantastic. To everybody else, thanks for joining us this evening. This message or this presentation has been recorded, and as long as the gremlins aren't too bad and my internet skills aren't too taxed, you'll be getting an email about it, and it'll be mentioned on the Facebook page as well with the YouTube link. So thanks everybody. Have a great evening and appreciate it. Stay safe and good birding.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone. Thanks.